So, it's Conscious Evolution Hats, FTM Records, with Paul Randle-Jolliffe here, and
Hi.
we're going to talk a little bit about the Magna Carta, but first, explain who you are, Paul.
Who am I? A guy from the Isle of Wight, who's actually very upset with what's happening in this country, particularly with the past two governments, and I think they're hurting a lot of people, and they need to stop doing that, and we need to find the ways to do that, how to challenge what they're doing.
And
it's our lives, yeah.
And how do you think we can?
Well, essentially I spent 4 months down at St.pauls in the occupation down there, which is obviously where we met, yeah. I walked into a tent you're in where you're live streaming, and I'm going, wow, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, even where we didn't get to speak, you know that down at the occupation there were people talking about an awful lot of things. You know, it wasn't just the silly stuff that got in the news. You know, it was a really exciting time. And while we're actually down there, we discovered that St. Paul's Cross is a historical meeting place in the City of London, you know, and it has such an amazing history. And one of the things that actually happened there was that basically the Crown is spending loads of money on war and taxing people really heavily. And this was last year. No, it wasn't. It was in 1213. And what happened is the barons got together with the bishops and said, King John, you're out of order. And they drafted this contract, if you like, yeah, an agreement, yeah, you know, a pledge, and they pledged to each other. And 2 years later, there was fighting. Yeah, they fought against the king. They rebelled against the king. They said no, and basically King John basically had to give in and agree to their proposal, because it reflected the culture and history of.
So what was King John trying to do?
Well, essentially, he was taxing to fight wars.
Mm.
You know, he was spending enormous amounts of money.
Taxing to fight wars?
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that very close to what we've got at the moment? Aren't we sort of repeating history a little bit? Yeah. Well, essentially, that agreement, yeah, still stands now.
And what is that agreement?
It's called the Magna Carta.
And how did they put it in place to begin with?
Well, essentially, you know, they had an argument. You know, they had a big argument, and it was a national one. And essentially, King John had to agree that what they were saying was actually right. Now, the interesting thing is, they didn't just look after their interests then. They set something in our law, which is still alive today, that protects us now. And this particular law is really known as the sort of foundation of the framework for our entire legal system. It's like our constitution.
And where can we find it?
There's only 4 copies left. One in Australia, one in the City of London, and I'm not sure where the other 2 are. I think possibly the Archbishop of Canterbury actually has a copy in his care. So probably at Canterbury. Essentially, it's a contract between the Crown, the King, the bishops, so it's the Church, the barons, members of the House of Lords, essentially now, and the people. And essentially, what happened was we discovered that the City of London had breached its agreement. Parliament is essentially, and the way in which many institutions are actually operating, are undermining it. They're ignoring it. Even the judiciary.
And this is today, yeah?
Yeah, but if you went back 300...
How are they ignoring it?
Okay, I'll come back to that. If you went 300 years, people understood the law of this country, you know, and what could and could not be done.
Which was?
Well, essentially, you know, it's embodied in the Magna Carta, you know, with lots of other laws as well, but it's fundamentally something like the Magna Carta that sets the principle. It set the direction.
Like common sense.
It is common sense. It's fair. You know, you've got various different groups of people, and they're to be treated fairly by essentially what is now the government. The king was the government then, with other people assisting. But the principle that was set is that really even the king is subject to law. Even the crown is subject to law. Yeah.
Does the crown consist of the people who own the square city of London, the square mile city of London as well?
No, not at all. The city of London is like an independent state. It's not fully subject and has never been fully subject to the crown. It's like a commune, if you like. So there are a lot of laws that it's not subject to. But it is a party to the Magna Carta, so it actually has responsibilities to protect...
To abide by the Magna Carta,
to abide by the Magna Carta and protect the interests of the other parties to the Magna Carta. Right? Now what you've had recently is the barons in the House of Lords. Tony Blair removed the hereditary barons. Yeah?
And that how did that affect?
Well, essentially, it broke one of the remedies that we have in our constitution, which is to approach the hereditary barons, who can form a committee to actually deal with these things, and they have the absolute authority to do so. That essentially is in the 1215 version, but there's been several versions. What used to happen was each successive king would actually reaffirm this, yeah. And the last one to actually be done in writing was in 1297. But kings after that reaffirmed the Magna Carta. The oath of the crown is essentially based on that reaffirming, yeah, to uphold the law of the land. And Magna Carta is the law of the land. There are others, important laws, that frame our...
What's the website we can reference the Magna Carta from?
You can look it up on Wikipedia. You know, it'll give you the full history of the Magna Carta.
It's on... there's also on the actual government website.
Yeah,
on the government law thing, it shows up the Magna Carta, doesn't it?
If you go to the bottom of the Wikipedia page, the top link is the link to the legislation database. So it's not only about law, it's in legislation. Yeah, it's an act of Parliament, very early one, and it's still there. Not all of it, but the most important bits are actually still there.
And which are they basically in today's terms?
Well, there's 3 sections that are still left in the legislation with different numbers in the earlier documents. But for convenience, legislation has numbers. So it's Section 1, Section 9 and Section 29. Now most people focus on Section 29, which gives us the right to trial, a fair trial, yeah, to be treated where your liberty's at stake. So you have to be treated according to the law of the land, yeah, and in certain circumstances by a jury of your peers. So this is where we get criminal trials. So you're up for murder, yeah. So the protection for that starts in the Magna Carta, in legislation, in law, written down. It may have been understood before, but it wasn't, so formally written down. But this is actually a charter of the crown, the king.
And that's what the Magna Carta means, also the Great Charter, doesn't it?
The Great Charter of Liberties. Yeah? Liberties. That wonderful word. Now, the American Constitution was founded on the Magna Carta. A lot of constitutional law frameworks have been set around the Magna Carta. We've only had one civil war in this country. One of the reasons for that is good law. But what we've got is people actually ignoring that law, sometimes criminally. I had an interesting meeting the other day with a member of the House of Lords, and what an inspiring man he was. He and I agreed. He was actually at a discussion about St.pauls Cross, the history of St.pauls Cross, and post-Occupy rescuing free speech at St.pauls Cross, but the Baron actually put it slightly stronger than that. And this, I think, is actually the important thing, is that he actually said that it's not free speech, it's actually the rule of law that we need to re-establish. And virtually every institution in this country is in some form or another breaking the law.
And how are they breaking the law?
well, essentially they are not upholding how we're meant to be treated under the law, therefore they break it. They step outside the law. Some of those instances are very, very serious. Instances where people are severely mistreated, possibly even imprisoned, for actually doing the right thing under the law.
So we've rounded up the history of the Magna Carta and what's been going on, and talked about the barons and what's been going on in the House of Lords as well. So I'm going to continue this with a part 2 of the interview with Paul Randle-Jolliffe at Conscious Evolution Hats, and we're going to talk some more about the solutions, okay? So make sure you check out the next video, and thank you for watching. Lots of love.
Cheers.